In a previous video, I compared footage captured with the new AdaptiveTone mode on the Insta360 X5 against standard footage without it enabled. Two key takeaways from that video were that AdaptiveTone can help reduce blown out highlights and preserve more detail in them, and that it dynamically adjusts the brightness when you reframe footage in post. Now those comparisons helped demonstrate some technical differences, but I wanted to see the true impact of AdaptiveTone in the real world. So in this video, I'll be comparing standard footage against AdaptiveTone footage across a range of everyday shooting scenarios, and at the end, I'll share my thoughts on when I think it's worth enabling and when it's probably better to just leave it off. Let's start with daylight scenes, which is where I think AdaptiveTone has the most noticeable impact on your footage. Overall, AdaptiveTone has a tendency to lower the exposure in bright conditions, helping limit blown out highlights. Colours also appear richer with AdaptiveTone enabled, with a noticeably deeper blue sky compared to the slightly flatter look you get with AdaptiveTone off. In many situations, the difference was quite subtle. That said, since AdaptiveTone seems to only be redistributing dynamic range rather than expanding the camera's actual dynamic range, I found shadows often looked a bit crushed and a bit too dark. It's basically a trade-off, less blown out highlights, but at the cost of deeper shadows, which can help in some shots, but not in others. So far, these comparisons have had the framing pointed straight forward without any reframing, which ignores one of AdaptiveTone's big advantages. When you reframe in post, you'll notice AdaptiveTone dynamically adjusts brightness as you move around the frame. When AdaptiveTone is off, this dynamic adjustment doesn't happen. In this first indoor scene, enabling AdaptiveTone made a clear difference. The colours look much better compared to shooting without it. Here's another example. AdaptiveTone again delivers more vivid and, in my opinion, pleasing colours. However, in darker indoor environments, the difference was less noticeable. When it came to low light scenes, AdaptiveTone seemed to have less of an impact on the overall look and feel. One exception was this dusk shot where the difference was surprisingly significant. That said, enabling pure video mode makes a far bigger difference than AdaptiveTone in the darkest conditions. One drawback of AdaptiveTone, something a viewer actually pointed out in my first AdaptiveTone video, is the introduction of motion artifacts. While most scenes were largely unaffected, a few stood out. For example, in this shot you can clearly see a jello effect on the wall. This issue doesn't occur when AdaptiveTone is off. If you look very closely at other clips, you'll often notice subtle and odd movements going on in the background. And in biking footage, I spotted artifacting in textures that wasn't there with AdaptiveTone disabled. This reminded me of an issue I had with D-Log-M motion footage on the Osmo Pocket 3, which was fixed by lowering the noise reduction setting. Essentially, AdaptiveTone is extra image processing, and that can lead to these strange artifacts. So after testing AdaptiveTone in real-world conditions, how do I feel about it? Well, honestly, it's not the slam dunk must enable feature I thought it might be after my initial tests. While you can definitely find examples where it did make an improvement, in many scenes it didn't make much difference. And in some cases, it arguably made things worse, like when shadows looked overly crushed. Overall, AdaptiveTone is useful when you want to reduce highlight clipping in right conditions, and prefer the deeper colors it produces compared to standard footage. It's also advantageous during reframing thanks to its dynamic brightness adjustment, which is obviously a big part of 360 filming that I didn't fully explore in this video. But in low light scenes where the X5 is already struggling for light, AdaptiveTone added little value while risking jello effects you wouldn't otherwise get. I'm also wary of the motion artifacts, plus the increased battery drain and heat. Because of that, I'm leaning towards keeping it off for biking footage, and instead just manually lowering the EV value to control blown out highlights. Now these are just my impressions from my limited testing, so I'd love to hear about your experience with the mode and how you feel about AdaptiveTone. Let me know in the comments section below.